Hello everyone. Hi, my name is Vibhor Bansal, the organizer of this webinar. With me is my colleague Ankita, who is a co-organizer,
Hi.
and and Manish, of course, the man of the hour, Manish, who is going to make the presentation here on the user experience. Uh,
Hello.
Uh, Thank you, Manish, for agreeing to conduct this webinar for us. Most of you among the attendees know that this is a webinar that we are doing for last 6 months now, and every alternate week we do this webinar. So far, we have done 10 of those in season one. We took a small pause, and then we are back with the season two, in which we are continuing the product management learning series. And in this series we will have 10 more webinars, and which would be more about value creation and innovation part of the product management. With first, we are talking about user experience today. Manish has divided this webinar in two parts. The topic will be in two parts. First, he will enlighten us with the value that design brings to the organization, and how can it add value to your products. And second part will be on a methodology of design thinking, the way of thinking for solving problems. So I will not take much of a time between you and Manish. So Manish, over to you, and we will manage the time. Just one small announcement before I finally hand it over to Manish. We have a small feedback form at the end of the webinar. It will not take more than 30 seconds of yours. Please do leave your feedback with us, because that will help us improvise further. Manish, over to you.
Thanks very much, Vibor. Once again, good afternoon to all the participants. Let me start by saying that I will talk about user experience. And let me go forward. Okay, these are some mandatory slide. So my name is Manish Jayant. I lead the user experience design team at SAP Labs Bangalore. I lead the SAP Cloud Platform design team specifically. And in terms of the agenda, I'm going to cover two topics. The first topic is about value of design. And when I say design, what I'd like to also point to is that I'm not focusing only on software as uh, an area where design is applied, but design in general. Then I'm going to talk about a methodology that many organizations today, including SAP, follow. It's called design thinking. Now, let's first start with the value of design. Let me start with an example. So I'm sure you remember this election that happened many years ago in the USA, and the candidates for the post of president were Bush and Al Gore. What happened was to vote, each voter was given this ballot. It was called a CHAD. And what the user had to do was basically to push this hole to indicate which candidate he or she wanted to vote for. Now, unfortunately, the if you look closer in this image, you see number 4 points to this hole, but number 5 is supposed to point to this, okay? And it somehow was not close. And if you again go back to the previous image and see how the information is presented, it is not very clear to the voter which candidate points to which hole. And this caused a major problem because many voters who wanted to vote for one candidate ended up voting for another candidate because they clicked into the or pressed into the wrong hole. So the net impact was that a small design flaw changed, let's say, to a great extent, history, if I may put it that way. So this is one small example of how certain design flaws can cause a big impact. Now, there are many other examples that we see in our daily lives. So another simple example is this milk carton. So here you can, you first have to open the cap and then you have to pull this secondary sort of a cover that is kept inside. Now, when you have to pull it out, what happens is the milk spills outside. Okay, and this is not a very nice, let's say, feeling when you have spilt milk outside. Now, let's look at another design where the user has to simply open the cap, turn it, and then when the cap is opened, the inner paper lining is also automatically opened. And here, the beverage that is inside the container does not spill out. That is because this has been designed in a better way. It has taken into consideration a lot of factors in terms of how the user would use this specific product. So what I want to convey is the fact that typically design is associated with something that looks really nice, something that's visually appealing. But the truth is, design is not only about how things look, but how they work. So I will quote a famous architect who was also associated with India. In fact, he designed the city of Chandigarh, Le Corbusier. He said, form follows function. So which means design is basically a reflection of the inherent behavior and functional aspects of any solution. And when I say solution, it could be as simple as a signboard to as complex as maybe an aircraft cockpit, which with all the indicators on it. And there are various interpretations of design, but one common aspect that you always see is that design finally is about enabling the user to complete something in a easy to do manner. And therefore, that is the fundamental, let's say, uh, aspect of design. It solves day-to-day problem. It's an enabler for solving problems. Now, one of the recent trends, especially in the last few years, is that a lot of importance is being given to design. And you might wonder why, what is causing this, let's say, change? So one of the reasons is a phenomena called digital, which means the world is going digital. Now, let me explain certain factors why the world is going digital and what is affecting it. So you can look at the notion of digital from various perspectives. So let's first start with the business or organizational aspects. Now, in the old world or the old way of doing things, typically business organizations were inward focused, which means they used to focus on all domains and business processes. And when I say business processes, they would have all their, let's say, departments within their organization. Like typically you have marketing, sales, IT, everything was contained within the organization and the focus was on providing an efficient service. However, today we see some fundamental shifts in this new world. I've read some articles, for example, in Fortune, and they call these companies the 21st century corporation. They have asset-light models. A perfect example is Apple. Now, Apple focuses on designing great solutions, and design and is their primary competency. But they don't manufacture those phones. They outsource it to other organizations because their core competency is design and managing the product life cycle and sales and marketing. So the 21st century corporations basically focus on core strengths and they have a business network where their processes are distributed. And This gives them the ability to be flexible and fast. And the reason why they have to be flexible and fast is because today innovation is key, and you have to focus on customer experience to stay ahead in the market and ahead of your competitors. Now, how does that relate to user experience design? So the question is, what is the impact of design then on when you consider these factors? So what is happening is that there are new business models today, and these models offer new ways to design and deliver solutions and experience. And here, design is positioned as a key and strategic differentiator. Like, for example, Apple, right? They say, look, our phones are well designed. Then there are technological aspects as well. So in the old world, things were monolithic, on-premise, they were, let's say, rigid and inflexible. But in the new world, things are flexible, especially with everything on the cloud. Everything is going the microservices way. Also with data and the speed at which data can be analyzed, you can get real-time insights, which enables smart decision making. And then, of course, all of you are aware of the latest buzzwords around big data, IoT, machine learning, AI, artificial reality, then virtual reality, augmented reality, the internet being pervasive all around you, plus things going haptic as well as voice-based. So the impact on design is that there are opportunities to offer a richer experience. So you don't have to now just touch and do things, but earlier it was the mouse, and now you had, and then it turned to touch-based interactions, and now we are going beyond that. I mean, you have products like Alexa, and then other haptic-based solutions. So what is happening is that all this is causing an impact in terms of providing a richer or opportunities for richer user experience. There are also changes taking place in the consumer and societal, in society, let's say this social environment. So typically what used to happen was that there was a clear separation between work and life. The focus was on selling a brand to a end user, and there was an acceptance of difficult to use software. However, in the new world, the boundaries between work life is blurred. The mobile user experience has caused a big impact because it's, you instantly consume things. So today, um, the end user does not wait. They want to consume instantly. And besides that, what is also happening is that there is a need to create emotional connections. And this is especially true with the millennial generation. And today we see we have a lot of millennials in the workforce, in the world. And so there are certain generational shifts where there is a need to create emotional connections, a common purpose, a set of shared values, and experiential consumption is something that's very important. And so the impact on design is that consumer grade user experience and is something that is taken for granted. You cannot, things have to be easy to consume, and consumption has to be instant. People don't have patience, they don't have the time to wait. Besides that, we also see changes in the product life cycle. So in the old world, we used to follow this waterfall model. The life cycle was longer, but in the new world, it is much more agile, shorter cycles, and there are quick decisions that you make based on analytics. DevOps is something that's there. And then we are also now looking at other ways of manufacturing, like 3D printing. Robotics is coming in a big way. Automation is already there. So the impact on design is that not just design, but I would say on the product itself, is that there is faster turnaround time. There is less wastage due to real-time and predictive insights that you get, and then you tend to release whatever your solution, your products, much faster. So that is, in a nutshell, about the factors that are affecting today's digital environment. Now, from a user experience perspective, if I had to sort of summarize what are the key attributes of UX in the near future, these are the main attributes. So as I mentioned, consumer grade user experience is key, which means ease of use and discoverability. There should be minimum learning, and it's all plug and play. And you have done this in your everyday lives. I mean, you have done it yourself, so I don't have to give examples. And this notion of consuming out of the box. You take things for granted, it is working, it is there, I simply go consume it. But another aspect that's also coming in is that things are getting more humanized. So this boundary between what you would call a non-human and human is getting blurred because of, let's say, big developments in natural language processing, in the ability for, let's say, software to be context aware, and its ability to learn and adapt, which also enables us to make intelligent connections. So which means you don't go beyond just connecting people to people, but you get into other areas such as you're connecting devices, you're connecting across business networks and in an intelligent way, because you're not simply connecting just for the sake of connecting, but there is a value when you do that and you gain something out of it. There's a benefit, and that's where intelligence comes in. Then of course things are going smarter, things are getting automated, there is intelligence, more predictive and proactive approach. So someone is already doing certain thinking for you, and you get better insights which enable you to take decisions. But having said that, user experience also drives good business. And let's see some recent trends. So today, it is evident that corporations and venture capitalists are investing in design competencies because they see the design competency as a key differentiator. And these are some examples of corporations that have bought design agencies. So it also goes to show why design plays a crucial role today. And one of the other reasons is also because the decision, especially in the workplace, in the enterprise domain, in terms of what software we buy, has moved to the line of business and the end user. They have started taking decisions. Traditionally, it was IT, the IT department, but today it is moving to the line of, or it has already moved to the line of business, because they're the ones who are providing the money for software, and therefore they want software that is easy to use, easy to consume, and which delivers a great experience. Because especially again in the enterprise domain, people don't come to work to have fun, right? There is a certain goal, certain efficiencies which are expected, and that is also inherent in the expectations from the software. So in a nutshell, design is moving from a nice to have competency to a must have competency. And another interesting, let's say, aspect, and this is just additional information, is that designers are founding or co-founding successful companies. So Airbnb is one example. It's a 2 billion plus company in terms of revenue. And there are many of these other examples of great companies, startups, and companies which have also matured, which were founded or co-founded by designers. Okay, so that was part one of my session. And just to summarize what I covered, my goal was to explain the value of design in terms of how design adds value and what is its place in today's environment. The second part of my presentation is about a topic called design thinking. So Design thinking is a methodology that is practiced by many organizations, and there are multiple focus areas. So basically, it can be understood as a way of thinking that is focused on solving problems using empathy. And this is very important. It is focused on solving problems using empathy, collaboration, and experimentation. And it can help solve complex problems and to create new ideas. Now, having said that, let's first understand what are the typical ingredients of design thinking. So there are three main ingredients. The first ingredient is that you need a diverse team. Two, you need a creative space where these people in the diverse team can engage with each other. And then it also needs an iterative approach. So there is a certain process that is associated with this methodology. So let's first look at the first ingredient, which is a diverse team. So what the design thinking methodology recommends is that if you have a team who's collaborating to work on a certain problem, then it should be a team of T-shaped people. And what that means is that it should be people who have expertise in various areas, but not just expertise in various areas, they should also have sufficient broad knowledge to be able to contribute to productive conversations. So for example, I may be an expert in user experience, but I would also be aware of the other, let's say, domains. But I don't have to be an expert in that so that I can contribute productively to conversations. So this is one, let's say, ingredient, a diverse team. The second ingredient is a creative space, because space does play a very important role in terms of how people think, and you have seen it in your workplaces compared to maybe 10, 15 years ago. There is a big difference in the way your workplace is structured. It's much more colorful, much more informal. And so that's why the creative space is extremely important. The third ingredient is the process itself. So here, the design thinking methodology is broken down into 6 main steps. And these steps are iterative. So it's not like you go from one step to another and you don't go back, but in certain situations, you can always go back. So what I will now do is, having spoken about the ingredients of design thinking, I will go through each of these steps and give you a very brief overview of what is typically done in each of these steps. So another point which I'd also like to make is that when you do design thinking, it's important to think like a designer. So, and what I mean is that designers typically, when there is a solution or a problem to solve, you go broad first, which means you simply come up with ideas, and then you focus later. The first step is to just generate as many ideas as possible. So the first step in the design thinking process is to understand and observe. And this is typically done through research. Today, there are various ways of doing research, but the goal is on understanding, for example, your customers or your end users. You also look at understand the needs of your stakeholders. You certainly do competitive benchmarking. You look at certain inspirations and trends. And of course, there is a lot of knowledge that is out there. And therefore, you collect all that information. So when you do this, you have a 360 degree, let's say, view of all the types of research information that you need. Now, once you have done that, you then have to step out. You do what is called field research, where you go to the audience that your solution is trying to address. And here you ask and listen, you try and do. Maybe you also try and do the tasks which they typically do, and then you watch and observe. And why is this very important? The reason why this is extremely important is because by doing this, you develop empathy for the user. That means you put yourself in the shoes of the end user, and then you will understand what are the challenges for this user, what are the problems, and you think from that user's perspective. And if you do that, chances of you being aligned with what the end user actually wants from the solution that you're trying to uh, deliver is probably much stronger. The chances are much higher. Then, so that in a nutshell was about the understanding and observation steps. The next step in the process is to define the point of view. So here, what typically happens is we use this methodology called storytelling, where you're trying to um, interpret the user's needs or requirements by telling a story. And then what you do is once you have identified these stories, you start clustering them to bucket them into meaningful, let's call it scenarios. And then the other important aspect is you also identify the persona, the actual end user, the people who are going to be using it. You know, what are their needs? What is their typical day like? What are their goals, etc. So you collect a lot of information about your target personas. Thereafter, once you have identified the user and then you have identified needs, and during your research phase, you would have also, especially if you have observed your users, spoken to them, you would have gained some insights. So the combination of the user, the target persona you are trying to address, their needs, and certain insights that you have obtained will give you a point of view. So a simple example is Uma, the API developer. So there is a certain role, would like to view and consume pre-created templates. So this is what the user would want to do because she can save on time and implementation effort. So there is a certain reason and certain benefits associated with this point of view. And if there is no reason or benefit, then you simply don't consider that as part of, let's say, the scenario that you would want to put into your solution. Then, after you define your point of view, the next step is the ideation process. So I would say combine it with ideation and prototyping. But when you do ideation, the first step is to do brainstorming. And when you do brainstorming, there are certain recommendations. The first recommendation is to be visual. That means if you can, because it's inherent human nature, the more visual things are, the more easier it is for you to understand it and communicate. And therefore, the first step is to be visual. You use sticky notes or any other more visual way of communicating information. The other important requirement, especially when you're brainstorming, is to defer judgment, because no idea is a bad idea or a stupid idea. It's the more you defer judgment, the better it is. So you can come up with crazy ideas because there is no harm. And in any case, like I said earlier, the first step is to go diverse. You come up with as many ideas as possible, and then you later on you start narrowing things down. So you defer judgment and just generate ideas. And you also encourage wild ideas. And like I said, no idea is uh, not good. Every idea is a possible solution. And therefore, it is good to encourage wild ideas. The other important aspect is that it's not necessary that It's only fresh ideas that are important. You can build on the ideas of others. So when one person gives an idea, then the others can add to that, and then it gives you various perspectives as well. So that also really helps, especially if you want to come up with innovative solutions. Then another important aspect of brainstorming is that you should go for quantity, because you're trying to generate as much ideas as possible. So don't limit it to a certain number. Of course, time can be a limitation because you have a certain time, but then you just go for quantity. Then what might also help is that you can play with constraints as well, especially if you know that that is something which is extremely important. So you can play with constraints. I know this is also contradictory to wild ideas, but it also helps you create certain boundaries within the idea generation activity. So that in a nutshell was the ideation phase. Then you get into the prototyping phase. So here, once you have those ideas generated, then you express those ideas, you bring them out. How? You, in the context of, let's say, software design, you come up with rough wireframes. These could be simple sketches, because the advantage with first starting out with sketches is that you can throw things away. Also, you don't fall in love with your design, because that is important. You should approach it with a very open, broad mind. Then there are certain typical activities that you do in the design process. So you create storyboards, and that maps to the point of view that you had generated earlier. And then once your, let's say, requirements are kind of finalized, you get into a low fidelity prototype, which is much more expressive. And there are prototyping tools today which help you do that. And finally, you get into a high fidelity prototype, or even a rough working, let's say, implementation. But the important aspect is that you should be open enough to make changes as and when required. Then once you have created your prototype, it is also very important to test, because doing what I call usability tests is a great opportunity to show your design to real users in order to validate your design concepts very early, so that if there is a possible challenge or issue, that does not come up later. It is already addressed earlier. So you solicit early feedback, you identify usability issues, and not even that. Oftentimes, your end users will also give you excellent suggestions, which is an advantage to you on how to resolve those feedback issues. And then it also helps set priorities for future scope and direction. And what is also important in a usability test is that also, although the functional aspects are sort of implicit, the focus is more on the user experience oriented topics, such as, how much of clarity is there in terms of information and structure in the user interface? How easy is it to navigate to where you want to go to? How easy is it for you to understand terminology? How good is the interaction? Is the visual design appealing? And overall, how intuitive and easy to use is the solution that you are designing? Typically, there is also a structure and process associated with usability tests. So we typically give test participants a series of tasks to complete using either a prototype or implemented system. We also observe how they carry out the tasks. And then we also use a protocol called the Think Aloud protocol to obtain feedback. So here the user is encouraged to verbally explain what he or she is thinking, what is going on in his or her mind. For example, I am looking for a save button. I'm not able to find it. So I'm searching for it and I'm expecting it to be somewhere at the bottom right-hand corner. So it also gives you a lot of information in terms of what the user is looking for. Typically, it's good practice to test with 5 to 10 participants, mainly because when you test with 1 or 2 participants, the feedback can be subjective. But when you test with more than 5, then you start seeing patterns. Certain feedback points are repeated. So then you know that, yes, this is something which is concrete feedback that makes sense to address. And then participants typically address the ease of doing a task on a Likert scale. So when you finally add it up and find an average, you have a good understanding of how usable your software could be. But of course, having said that, this is not a perfect science, nor is it an art. It is somewhere in between, because the difficulty is that we are human beings and design is very subjective. But it sort of gives you a rough indication in terms of how easy or difficult to use is your design. So this is what I wanted to cover. So in summary, what I've done is my first part covered the value of design. The second part, I spoke about design thinking. Of course, this was a very brief overview. There is a lot of literature out there. So just type in design thinking and you'll find a lot of information. And these are the 6 steps that you typically follow when you do design thinking. And another key takeaway which I would want you to remember from this session is that if, let's say, you want to come up with something that is innovative, then typically it consists of 3 aspects. An innovative solution is typically has some kind of a business viability, which means users would pay for it to use it. Then there is also a technical feasibility aspect, which means it can be technically implemented or it can be created given certain technical, let's say, infrastructure that's available. And also it is something which a user would want. So there is this human desirability aspect. So optimal solutions typically find a balance between all the 3. And those solutions are typically these innovative solutions. And I will leave you with this great example, which I learned from Tesla. So all of you know about Tesla Motors, right? It's a electric car. Now, what happened was the battery of the Tesla car is at the bottom of the car. Okay. And now a few years ago, when the drivers were driving the car on the highway, sometimes what would happen is that the tire would go over some pebbles on the road. And then when that happened, once what happened was this pebble went and hit the bottom of the car. It hit the battery, and then it made a hole in the battery and the battery blew up. Okay, so this was a problem which Tesla faced. Now, let's consider a similar situation if there was another car manufacturer. What would they have to do? They would have to do a recall of all the cars. They would then take it to, let's say, their area where they have to repair it. They would then have to, let's say, if lifting or increasing the height between the road surface and the bottom of the car is a solution, they'll have to manually do that, right? So that is what you would do, and typically it will cost a lot of money for the recall. But what did Tesla do? The Tesla car is basically, let's say, a computer on wheels. It can connect through software. So all that Tesla did was and since this is also connected to the internet, they simply sent a software patch over the internet into the car, telling the car to increase its height, to raise its height to whatever they wanted it to go up to for that safe level. And then the problem was solved. So all that the driver had to do was simply accept that software patch in his or her console, and then they solved the problem. So, and they didn't have to spend much money. And how did they do it? Because they innovated, and there was a business viability there, because they saved on money. Technically, they made it possible because it was connected to the internet, and it's basically a laptop on, or let's say a computer on wheels. And the experience for the driver was great. They didn't have to return the car. They simply accepted the software patch, and the problem was solved. So with that, that ends my presentation. I just wanted to mention that there is another session on 26th of July on collaborative innovation by PB Karthikeyan. With that, thanks a lot for your time, and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you, Manish.
Hello.
Hi. So, hi, Manish. Thanks a lot. Thanks for this very wonderful presentation. So, guys, if you have further questions, you can write in the chat. Manish, there are some questions which I have assigned to you. You must be seeing the question tab on your control panel.
Okay.
If you could enlarge it, you could see it. Okay. And folks, please do leave your feedback when at the end of this session. And and for the next session, we will have it on the 26th, as just Manish mentioned. Uh, this will be on the collaborative innovation, the next webinar on the same series. There are more webinars on different topics. For that, you can go to event page of NASSCOM.in, and you will come to know more events, more sessions that are lined up in a month or so. Manish, are you able to see the questions, or you want me to read
Yes,
out the
I can. Yeah, I can see the question. So I have. Oh, I closed that by mistake. Okay, I wanted to expand it further. Okay, so the
Can you,
first question is: should I go through these questions one by one?
yeah, please.
Okay, what are the design criteria when the interface is voice-based? As design was focused on visual, are there any specific for the voice interface and not the voice interface product? So my answer is that there are some guidelines, but they are still at a very, let's say, nascent phase. Okay. Voice is still far away. Right now, the focus is more on, as you would have also seen, chatbots and things like that. Voice is still a little away. So that would be my answer. There are some guidelines, but it is not concrete yet. It's very specific to the solutions. Okay, can you give up functionality for minimalism? I would say yes, if that is what your end user wants, and if you can convince your end user of the value. So finally, it is the end user who determines that. So I know for a fact that there was a survey done some time ago, and 60% of features in a software are not used. Only 40% is used. So especially now that we are going on the cloud, it is important to focus on functionality which is really used. And going on the cloud also has that advantage, because you can determine, you can get feedback in terms of what is used. Next question, how can one practice design thinking, especially when the client base is in a different geographical location? So to me, today geography is not important, because today we have communication methods that enable you to practice design thinking remotely. Of course, face-to-face is always good, but I would say that if you there is an advantage, and if there is a cost associated with it, I think it's money well worth spent. Is there a same app used by different segments of users? How are conflicting design elements handled? Example, a user needs a fast and simple way, but many times business requests some additional approvals or data entry for internal reasons. Sorry, I did not understand this question. Is it because of maybe a conflict between what the business wants and what the end user really wants? Okay, I'm sorry, but I have to skip that. I did not understand. How do we incorporate change management? Well, I would say today change is something that is normal. It has to be handled well, and I think there are ways to do it. I don't want to get into the details because it's also a very generic question. How much of customers define design viability? Is it entire or partially defined? So let's put it this way. Many of the customers are not aware also. So it is the you who have to also encourage and educate the customers in terms of how design can deliver value. You have to show examples. How do we implement UX with cost-effective solution? Please give an example. Well, a simple example of cost-effective solution is that if you have not tested your design early, and then you go and implement it, and then you find problems, you have to spend a lot of time, effort, and money in terms of fixing the problems. So if you know, if you do early validation, you know where you have gone wrong or where you have to fix things, then you save on, then you get a cost-effective solution. Okay, so there was a question of how did raising the height of Tesla car can be termed as a design thinking solution, as raise of 4 to 5 mm does not height won't solve the actual problem. Okay, so here my focus was more on the way they identified to solve the problem. Now, I don't know too much of the details, but my assumption is that it's quite possible that it might have reduced if you increase the height by a certain amount. Maybe the velocity of the pebble might have come down. But like I said, I'm just guessing. But what I wanted to focus on is the fact that they thought differently, right? The fact that they provided an alternative solution. And that is what I wanted to convey. I just wanted to focus on an innovative solution. How to track gaps if solution via design thinking fails or not getting to any common agreeable solution. Well, yes, there could be gaps, but then it's iterative. You have to again iterate. You cannot solve everything the first time around. There will be gaps. You have to iteratively close those gaps. How to come up with a design that is better than existing solutions and can break mental model of users. So if you have a existing solution, well, you try and get feedback from existing users. What are the problems that they see? That would be one area. You also you have to do research to understand what are there better solutions out there. How can you add more value by coming up with a better solution? So if I would recommend you follow the design thinking methodology, and then you would definitely come up with a solution. And if you show value, I'm sure the end users will definitely accept it. If the product is already developed, how can we implement design thinking processes to it? Well, it's simple. Even if the product is developed, the next version, you apply the design thinking process and you see what needs to be changed. Okay, I think this question was it's repeated again. Sometimes security implications force certain design changes that the end user may not want. For example, login should be available for access. What should be done in that case? Well, the way I would look at it is then there should be a clear communication to the user why you are doing this. What is the advantage, or why is there a need for that? Because users definitely understand. If you can explain clearly, for example, here you have to log in because of whatever confidential aspects or security related aspects, then they will understand. What gets priority between business or end user experience? It's a balance of both. Everything is equally important. As I explained, those 3 points of the triangle, it is a balance of both. You might, for example, you might have a really great design, but people are not willing to buy it, then it's a failure. Or you might have a great design which people might be willing to pay, but there's a big performance hit, still it's a failure. So it's a combination of all the 3. You have to look at things holistically. Is there any checklist guideline to assess tech, business, human feasibility, desirability? No, I'm not aware of any checklist, because that's very subjective also. It depends on your solution. Design thinking as it is iterative with prototyping, implementation, and test. Is this not the same as providing minimal viable product solution in an agile working mode? Part of design thinking is requirement definition early in the game. This happened in traditional development and current agile format of, so why a hype of design thinking now? This looks similar to, yes, so I agree that there is an overlap between the agile methodology and design thinking, but as I told you earlier, design thinking focuses on empathy. That is very important, understanding your user, whereas to me, agile is just a process of implementing software. But the essence of design thinking is also about the end user, keeping in mind the end user, going to them, understanding their requirements. So that is the core of design thinking. Also taking into consideration these 3 factors, such as the business aspects, the technical aspects, as well as the desirability aspects. How do you account for the effort, time taken into designing of a solution while quoting for a product or a solution? Okay, so, well, it's like I said earlier, it's important to show value that design brings. And I think in today's environment, customers do see the value of good design, because they, in their daily lives, also use well-designed solutions. So it is left up to you to show the value. How to price my design consultancy services? To be honest, I don't know. I wouldn't be able to answer that question. How to calculate cost in case sharing wireframe and UI to customers and evaluating? product. I'm sorry, I didn't understand this question. Well, I would maybe this answer is wrong, but the advantage with sharing a wireframe and the UI to customers is that it's a mode of communication. It's a way of showing how their solution would look like, and it's more tangible. You don't have to talk in terms of requirements in the form of text, but when you show something, they're able to relate to it better. It's more visual. Okay, any books, web links, just Google, you'll find plenty. How is data analytics helping? Well, any analytical information is a decision enabler. So it helps you take certain decisions. And so it should definitely help, especially if you're doing the design thinking methodology and your research phase. If you can use analytical data to be able to get some insights, then that will help you define your point of view in a more focused manner. If the product was not used by the user, what actions can be taken or to make those users to start using the application? Well, I think you first need to find out why they have not used it. And please don't assume, because then it becomes an assumption, not a fact. So I would encourage you to, if you know certain actions or let's say certain parts of the product which are not used, then go to the users and ask them why. Design thinking requires time and effort and research. However, what can we do when we are short on time? Well, I think there should be a change in the mindset. It's quality matters more than quantity. So you have to have reserve certain amount of time, and design thinking does not take too long. It can be done pretty quickly. What you should do is you break down the problem into smaller chunks and apply design thinking to those smaller chunks. So then you solve the problem part by part. But of course, you have to invest some time to get a good solution. Okay, I think those are the questions. I hope I was able to answer them and in a meaningful manner. If not, apologize. So Vibor, anything else? I think I don't see any more questions.
Yeah, so we have a couple of more questions, but in paucity of time, I think we can get back to them offline. Have a couple of more questions, not much, that can be taken offline. Maybe I'll send those questions to you, and you can respond to them, and can be shared back with the audience. Thank you very much, Manish, and thank you everyone for joining this webinar. It was good food for thoughts. Manish, and we will get back, guys, again with the next topic on 26th on the product management and beyond product management. Any other webinar, you can check it out on our event page at nasscom.in. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.